I'm Sarah Mitchell, and I'm 28 years old. 3 months ago, I thought I knew exactly where I stood in my family. I was the reliable daughter, the one who always showed up, always helped out, always said yes when anyone needed anything. I had built what I thought was a solid relationship with my younger sister Jessica, and I genuinely believed that our bond was unbreakable. That illusion shattered completely on a Saturday afternoon at Grandview Country Club, during what was supposed to be the happiest day of Jessica's life so far. Picture this. I'm standing near the champagne fountain, wearing the pale blue dress that Jessica specifically requested all the bridesmaids wear, watching my sister pose for what felt like the 100th photo of her engagement party. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The photographer was positioning family members for the formal shots, and I was waiting for my turn to join the group. That's when I heard Jessica's voice cut through the chatter like a knife. No, Sarah doesn't need to be in these, she said, waving her hand dismissively at the photographer. These are just for immediate family and people who really matter. She can take some casual ones later if she wants. The words hit me like a physical blow. I stood there, frozen, holding my champagne glass so tightly I thought it might shatter in my trembling fingers. Around me, relatives and friends continued chatting and laughing, completely oblivious to the fact that I had just been publicly excluded from my own sister's engagement photos. The photographer looked confused, glancing between Jessica and me, clearly uncomfortable with the family drama unfolding in front of his lens. But here's the thing that made it even worse. For the past 4 years, I had been quietly funding Jessica's entire lifestyle. The designer clothes she was wearing that day, the professional makeup artist who had spent 2 hours perfecting her look, the stunning engagement ring sparkling on her finger, even the lavish venue where we were celebrating. All of it had been possible because of money that came directly from my bank account, transferred month after month without question, without acknowledgement, and apparently without gratitude. Now, let me take you back to the beginning of this mess, because what happened that day at Grandview Country Club was just the tip of an iceberg that had been building for years. To understand how I ended up being treated like a stranger at my own sister's engagement party, you need to know about the Mitchell family dynamics and how I somehow became the family ATM without ever realizing it was happening. I've always been what people call the responsible one. While other kids were staying out late and getting into trouble, I was home studying, working part-time jobs, and planning for my future. By the time I graduated from UC Davis with a degree in finance, I had already secured an internship at Pacific Financial Services that would eventually turn into my current position as a senior financial analyst. I'm the type of person who tracks every expense, maximizes retirement contributions, and actually reads the fine print on contracts before signing them. My apartment in Maple Ridge is modest but comfortable. It's a 1-bedroom unit with a small balcony where I grow herbs and cherry tomatoes in containers. The furniture is mostly secondhand pieces I've refinished myself, and while it's not Instagram-worthy, it's paid for, and it's mine. I drive a reliable Honda Civic that I bought used and maintain meticulously. Every month, I put money into savings, contribute to my 401k, and send a portion of my paycheck to help with what I thought were legitimate family expenses. My sister Jessica, on the other hand, has always been the golden child. 2 years younger than me, she's everything I'm not. Blonde where I'm brunette, outgoing where I'm reserved, spontaneous where I'm planned. Jessica has this natural charisma that draws people to her like a magnet. She can walk into a room and within minutes have everyone laughing at her stories and hanging on her every word. Growing up, I genuinely admired this about her. I thought we complemented each other perfectly. She brought the fun and excitement, and I brought the stability and common sense. After high school, while I was grinding through college courses and working nights at a campus coffee shop to pay for books and expenses, Jessica decided that traditional college wasn't for her. Instead, she wanted to pursue her passion for fashion and social media. She moved into a trendy downtown loft and started what she called her lifestyle brand. At first, it seemed like she was actually building something legitimate. She had a blog, an Instagram account that was gaining followers, and she talked constantly about brand partnerships and collaboration opportunities. Our parents, Robert and Linda Mitchell, were initially skeptical about Jessica's unconventional career path, but they came around when she started showing them engagement metrics, and talking about influencer marketing like it was a real business. Dad owns Mitchell Construction, LLC, a company he built from the ground up over the past 25 years. He's proud of his success and has always wanted his daughters to be ambitious and independent. When Jessica convinced him that social media influence was the future of marketing, he decided to support her venture. Mom, Linda, has always been the emotional center of our family. She's the one who remembers birthdays, organizes holiday gatherings, and tries to keep everyone happy. She worked as an elementary school teacher for 15 years, before deciding to focus on supporting Dad's business and raising Jessica and me. Mom has this way of seeing the best in everyone, sometimes to a fault. When Jessica would come home with grand plans and big dreams, Mom would get caught up in the excitement and encourage Dad to help make those dreams possible. The financial support for Jessica started small and seemed reasonable. A few $100s here and there for professional photo shoots, website development, or networking events. Jessica would explain that these were necessary investments in her brand, and that once her following grew large enough, the sponsorship deals would start rolling in and she'd be able to pay everyone back with interest. She had spreadsheets showing projected growth and potential earnings that looked impressive to our parents, who didn't really understand the influencer economy but wanted to support their daughter's entrepreneurial spirit. I was living my own life during this time, focused on my career and building my own financial foundation. I was vaguely aware that Jessica was getting some help from our parents, but I didn't think much of it. Lots of young adults get financial support from family while they're getting established, and Jessica seemed to be working hard to build something legitimate. She was constantly posting content, attending events, and meeting with potential business partners. From the outside, it looked like she was putting in the effort to make her dreams a reality. The first time Jessica asked me directly for money was about 3.5 years ago. She called me on a Tuesday evening. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Evening, sounding stressed and desperate. She explained that there was an amazing opportunity to attend a major Fashion Week event in Los Angeles, but she needed to cover travel expenses, accommodation, and networking event tickets. The total came to about $1,500, which she promised to pay back within 2 months once she secured the brand partnerships that would inevitably result from the connections she made. I remember hesitating, not because I didn't want to help my sister, but because $1,500 was a significant amount of money for me at the time. I was still relatively early in my career, and I was working hard to build up my emergency fund and save for a down payment on a house. But Jessica sounded so confident about the return on investment, and she'd never asked me for anything before. I convinced myself that this was what family members do for each other. We help each other succeed. So I transferred the money to her account that night, and Jessica was incredibly grateful. She sent me photos from the event, introduced me to her followers as her amazing, supportive sister, and promised that she was making connections that would transform her business. She seemed so happy and confident that I felt good about my decision to help her. When the 2-month deadline came and went without repayment, I didn't say anything. Jessica was posting about several potential deals in the works, and I figured the money would come when her business picked up. That first loan set a precedent that I didn't recognize at the time. Over the following months, Jessica would reach out whenever she had what she called investment opportunities. A professional branding consultant who could take her content to the next level. A photography workshop with an industry expert. New equipment for creating higher quality videos. Each request seemed reasonable on its own, and Jessica always had a compelling explanation for why this particular expense would be the key to unlocking her success. I started thinking of these transfers as investments in Jessica's future rather than loans. She was my sister, and if her business took off, she'd obviously take care of the people who had supported her along the way. I wasn't keeping detailed records because I trusted that Jessica was keeping track of what she owed me. The amounts varied from a few hundred to a couple $1,000s, depending on the opportunity, but none of them seemed unreasonable for someone building a legitimate business. What I didn't realize was that our parents were also increasing their financial support for Jessica during this same period. Dad had started covering her rent on the downtown loft, which I learned much later was costing him nearly $3,000 a month. Mom was handling Jessica's car payments, insurance, and most of her daily living expenses. Between my contributions and theirs, Jessica was receiving more money than many people earn in full-time jobs, but somehow it never seemed to be enough. Meanwhile, my own life was progressing steadily, but without any financial assistance from anyone. I received promotions at Pacific Financial Services based on my performance and dedication. I was handling increasingly complex client portfolios and earning recognition from senior management for my analytical skills and attention to detail. My salary increased gradually over the years, and I was proud of what I was building through my own efforts. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was professionally helping other people grow their wealth while personally funding my sister's lifestyle without seeing any return on investment. But I told myself that family relationships aren't transactional, and that Jessica's success would ultimately benefit everyone. I convinced myself that I was being a good sister by providing support without keeping score or demanding immediate repayment. About 2 years ago, Jessica met David Thompson at a networking event in San Francisco. David works for Thompson & Associates investment firm, which his family owns and operates. The Thompsons are old money, the kind of family that has multiple homes, belongs to exclusive country clubs, and expects their social circle to maintain certain standards of appearance and lifestyle. When Jessica started dating David, she became even more focused on projecting an image of success and sophistication. Suddenly, Jessica's expenses increased dramatically. She needed a new wardrobe for the upscale restaurants and events that David's social circle frequented. She hired a personal trainer and nutritionist to maintain the fitness standards expected in his world. She upgraded her apartment furnishings and started shopping at boutiques instead of department stores. Her content shifted to focus on luxury lifestyle topics, featuring expensive products and exclusive experiences. The requests for financial help became more frequent and larger in amount. Jessica would explain that she needed to look the part to fit into David's world, and that these expenses were actually investments in securing a relationship that could provide long-term financial stability for our entire family. She painted a picture of David as her ticket to the kind of life she'd always dreamed of, and suggested that my support during this crucial period would pay dividends for years to come. I was working longer hours at Pacific Financial Services and earning more money, so the increased financial requests didn't immediately strain my budget. Jessica seemed genuinely happy with David, and I wanted her to succeed in this relationship if it was what she wanted. I told myself that love sometimes requires sacrifice, and that helping Jessica present her best self to David's family was a worthwhile investment in her happiness. What I didn't know was that Jessica had been completely dishonest with David about her financial situation. She had led him to believe that her lifestyle was funded by her successful influencer business, not by family support. David thought he was dating an independent, successful entrepreneur who had built her own brand and income stream. Jessica showed him carefully curated metrics that made her social media presence look more profitable than it actually was, and she never mentioned the thousands of dollars flowing to her each month from our parents and me. The engagement happened last spring during a romantic weekend getaway that Jessica later told me had cost David over $8,000. He proposed with a ring that must have been worth at least $20,000, based on the size and quality of the diamond. Jessica posted dozens of photos and videos of the proposal, and her followers went crazy with congratulations and excitement. She looked genuinely radiant and happy, and I was thrilled for her. But even the engagement created new financial pressures. Jessica wanted to celebrate with an elaborate engagement party that would impress David's family and friends. She needed a new dress, professional hair and makeup, and she wanted the event to be held at Grandview Country Club, one of the most expensive venues in Oakville. When she started planning the party, she came to me with a detailed budget and timeline that made it clear this was going to be a major production. The total cost for the engagement party was estimated at nearly $15,000, which was far beyond what Jessica could afford even with her usual family support. She asked if I could cover about half of that amount, explaining that this party would set the tone for her entire relationship with David's family. She stressed how important it was to make a good impression, and how this investment in her future would benefit our whole family when she married into the Thompson wealth. I agreed to help with the engagement party expenses, but for the first time, I asked Jessica to provide me with a detailed accounting of what she already owed me. I had started to lose track of the various transfers and loans, and I wanted to understand the full scope of my investment in her success. Jessica seemed surprised by this request, and she promised to put together a comprehensive list, but said she was too busy with party planning to do it right away. The weeks leading up to the engagement party were a whirlwind of activity. Jessica was constantly stressed about details and logistics, and she leaned heavily on our entire family for support. I spent several evenings helping her address invitations, research caterers, and coordinate with vendors. Mom was handling decorations and flowers, while Dad was using his business connections to get better prices on some of the more expensive elements. I took time off work to help with final preparations, drove Jessica to appointments when her anxiety made it difficult for her to drive herself, and even lent her my car when hers was in the shop. I was genuinely excited for her and wanted the party to be perfect. Despite my growing concerns about the financial arrangements, I loved my sister and wanted her to be happy. The day of the engagement party arrived with typical California sunshine and perfect weather. Grandview Country Club looked absolutely stunning, with white and gold decorations that complemented the venue's natural elegance. Jessica looked beautiful in her designer dress, and David seemed genuinely happy and proud to be celebrating with both families. The guest list included about 80 people, split fairly evenly between the Mitchells and the Thompsons. I had spent the morning helping with last-minute setup details, coordinating with the catering staff, and making sure everything was running smoothly. My dress was one that Jessica had specifically requested for the bridal party, a pale blue color that complemented her chosen aesthetic. I felt good about how everything was coming together, and I was looking forward to celebrating my sister's happiness and future. The first few hours of the party went perfectly. Guests were mingling, the food was excellent, and Jessica was glowing with happiness as she showed off her ring and accepted congratulations. I spent time chatting with relatives I hadn't seen in months, and I enjoyed meeting some of David's family members who seemed genuinely warm and welcoming. The photographer was capturing beautiful, candid moments, and the formal photo session was scheduled for later in the afternoon when the lighting would be optimal. That's when everything changed. When the photographer started organizing people for the formal family photos, I naturally moved toward the group. These weren't just any photos. These were the pictures that would be framed, displayed in homes, and treasured for years to come. These were the images that would document this milestone moment in Jessica's life and our family's history. And that's when my sister looked directly at me and said the words that would haunt me for months afterward. No, Sarah doesn't need to be in these. These are just for immediate family and people who really matter. She can take some casual ones later if she wants. The casual dismissal in her voice was almost worse than the words themselves. She wasn't angry or emotional. She was simply stating what she apparently believed to be an obvious fact. In her mind, I didn't qualify as immediate family or as someone who really mattered, despite everything I had done to support her and make this day possible. I stood there in my pale blue dress, the one she had specifically chosen for me to wear, holding a champagne glass with hands that had started to shake. Around me, the party continued as if nothing had happened. David's family was positioning themselves for photos. Our parents were beaming with pride, and Jessica was arranging her dress and checking her makeup in a compact mirror. But I felt like I had been slapped in front of 80 people, publicly declared irrelevant in my own sister's life. The photographer was clearly uncomfortable and kept glancing at me as if waiting for someone to correct what was obviously a mistake. But no correction came. Our parents said nothing. David said nothing. And Jessica continued directing the photo session as if I had simply vanished from existence. That moment at Grandview Country Club was the beginning of the end of everything I thought I knew about my family, my sister, and my place in their lives. But it was also the beginning of something else. It was the moment I started to wake up from years of enabling and self-deception, and began to see the truth about what I had become in the Mitchell family dynamic. What happened next would force all of us to confront realities we had been avoiding for years, and it would ultimately change everything about how we related to each other. But that revelation was still to come, and first, I had to survive the rest of that engagement party while processing the fact that my own sister had just publicly declared that I didn't matter enough to be included in the most important photos of her life. David Thompson entered Jessica's life like a character from a romance novel, complete with the perfect background story that our parents absolutely loved hearing about. He had graduated from Stanford with an MBA and immediately joined his family's investment firm, where he specialized in high-net-worth client portfolios. When Jessica first brought him home for dinner, Dad spent the entire evening asking him about market trends and investment strategies, clearly impressed by David's knowledge and articulate responses. The Thompson family had been established in California's financial sector for 3 generations. David's grandfather had started the firm in the 1960s, his father had expanded it throughout the state, and now David was being groomed to eventually take over operations. They owned a primary residence in Pacific Heights, a vacation home in Napa Valley, and a ski lodge in Tahoe. David drove a BMW sedan that was newer than any car our family had ever owned, and he wore watches that probably cost more than most people's monthly salaries. What struck me most about David during those early dinners was how genuinely kind and down-to-earth he seemed, despite his privileged background. He asked thoughtful questions about my work at Pacific Financial Services, remembering details from previous conversations and showing real interest in my career progression. He helped Mom clear dishes without being asked, complimented Dad on his construction projects, and treated Jessica with obvious affection and respect. Margaret and Stephen Thompson, David's parents, were exactly what you'd expect from old-money California families. They had that effortless elegance that comes from never having worried about money, combined with the social awareness that comes from generations of charitable work and community involvement. Margaret served on the boards of 3 different arts organizations and had organized fundraising galas that routinely raised millions of dollars for various causes. Stephen had been featured in financial magazines for his innovative investment strategies and his firm's consistent performance over decades. When Jessica started dating David seriously, she began studying the Thompson family lifestyle like it was a graduate course she needed to pass. She researched the restaurants they frequented, learned about wine regions they visited, and started following fashion bloggers who dressed for the same social circles. She hired a personal stylist to help her build a wardrobe that would fit seamlessly into their world, explaining to me that first impressions with wealthy families could make or break a relationship. The transformation was remarkable and concerning at the same time. Jessica had always been interested in fashion and beauty, but now she approached these interests with an intensity that bordered on obsession. She spent hours researching the perfect outfit for each event she attended with David, often ordering multiple options online and returning the pieces that didn't meet her standards. Her Instagram content shifted to focus exclusively on luxury lifestyle topics, featuring products and experiences that her actual income couldn't possibly support. Mom was thrilled about Jessica's relationship with David, but for reasons that made me increasingly uncomfortable. She would spend our weekly phone calls discussing David's family background, their social connections, and what Jessica's marriage into their circle would mean for our family's social status. Mom started researching proper etiquette for wealthy families, buying books about entertaining and social protocols that she studied like instruction manuals. Dad's reaction was more complex. On one hand, he was proud that Jessica had attracted someone from such a successful family, and he enjoyed his conversations with David about business and finance. On the other hand, I could see him calculating the costs of keeping up with the Thompson family expectations, and I knew our modest background made him feel insecure in ways he'd never experienced before. He started dropping comments about expanding his construction business, taking on larger commercial projects, and building the kind of wealth that would make our family worthy partners for the Thompsons. The financial pressure this relationship created was enormous, though it took me months to fully understand the scope of what was happening. Jessica needed a wardrobe overhaul to fit into David's social circle, which meant designer clothes, professional styling, and regular beauty treatments that cost more than most people's rent. She needed to live in an apartment that would impress David and his friends, which meant upgrading to a luxury downtown loft with modern furnishings and high-end appliances. Most importantly, Jessica needed to maintain the illusion that her lifestyle was funded by her successful influencer business rather than by family support. This meant she had to be careful about how she presented her financial situation to David, creating elaborate stories about brand partnerships and collaboration deals that justified her expensive tastes. She became incredibly skilled at manipulating social media metrics to make her influence appear more valuable than it actually was. The lies she told David about her financial independence were sophisticated and detailed. She created fake invoices from imaginary clients, staged photo shoots to look like professional brand collaborations, and developed an entire fictional narrative about her business growth and profitability. When David asked about her income or business model, Jessica had prepared responses that sounded convincing to someone who wasn't familiar with the influencer industry. What made the deception even more complicated was that David genuinely believed he was dating a successful entrepreneur. He would brag to his friends and family about Jessica's business acumen and creative vision. He respected what he thought was her financial independence, and often asked for her advice about social media marketing strategies for his firm's clients. Jessica had become so invested in maintaining this persona that she sometimes seemed to believe her own stories about her success. The engagement ring David chose was absolutely stunning. A 3-carat diamond in a classic setting that perfectly suited Jessica's style. When she showed it to our family, Mom actually gasped and Dad whistled in appreciation. Jessica told us that David had been planning the proposal for months, working with a jeweler to create something unique and meaningful. The ring was exactly the kind of piece that belonged in the Thompson family collection, elegant and valuable without being ostentatious. But even the engagement created new pressures and expectations. Margaret Thompson immediately began discussing wedding plans, mentioning venues like the St. Regis Hotel and suggesting guest lists that would include prominent political and business figures. She talked about wedding photographers who specialized in high society events, florists who designed for celebrity weddings, and caterers who were booked years in advance by families like theirs. Jessica came home from her first official dinner with the Thompson family looking overwhelmed and slightly panicked. She explained that they had discussed wedding budgets in the range of $200,000, timeline expectations that required a year of advance planning, and social obligations that would continue long after the wedding itself. Margaret had mentioned that Thompson family weddings were typically featured in society magazines, and that Jessica would need to be prepared for that level of public attention. The engagement party planning became Jessica's full-time occupation for months leading up to the event. She researched every detail obsessively, from the specific shade of white roses that would complement the Grandview Country Club decor, to the precise font for the invitation calligraphy. She hired a wedding planner who specialized in high-end events, explaining that this party would set the tone for the entire wedding planning process and needed to meet Thompson family standards. Dad agreed to cover the venue costs and catering, which totaled nearly $8,000 for the afternoon event. Mom handled decorations, flowers, and photography, spending weeks coordinating with various vendors to create the perfect atmosphere. Jessica asked me to cover the remaining expenses, including her dress, professional hair and makeup, party favors, and miscellaneous costs that added up to another $7,000. When I agreed to help with the engagement party expenses, I asked Jessica for a detailed accounting of what she already owed me from the previous years of support. This was the first time I had ever requested any kind of formal documentation of our financial arrangements, and Jessica seemed genuinely surprised by the request. She promised to compile a comprehensive list, but explained that she was too busy with party planning to focus on it immediately. Looking back, I realized that Jessica's surprise at my request for an accounting should have been a red flag. Any legitimate business owner would have detailed records of loans and investments, and any responsible person would keep track of money borrowed from family members. The fact that Jessica seemed to view my financial support as something that didn't require documentation or repayment planning should have told me everything I needed to know about how she perceived our relationship. Part 3. The request and initial agreement. The first time Jessica asked me for money was during what seemed like a casual sister conversation over coffee at Sunrise Cafe. We had been meeting there regularly for years, usually on Saturday mornings when we both had time to catch up on each other's lives. I always looked forward to these coffee dates because they felt like a connection to the close relationship we'd had growing up, before adult responsibilities and different life paths had started to create distance between us. Jessica seemed unusually nervous that particular Saturday, fidgeting with her phone and checking the time repeatedly. When I asked if everything was okay, she laughed and said she was just excited about a potential opportunity that could really transform her business. She had been invited to attend a major fashion and lifestyle conference in Los Angeles, where influencers could network with brand representatives, attend workshops on content creation, and participate in collaboration opportunities that could lead to significant partnerships. The conference registration fee was $800. But Jessica explained that the real value was in the networking opportunities and the professional development sessions. She had researched the other attendees and identified several brand representatives who worked with influencers in her niche. She was confident that making the right connections at this event could lead to the kind of partnerships that would finally make her business profitable and sustainable. However, the total cost of attending the conference went beyond just the registration fee. She needed airfare to Los Angeles, 3 nights of hotel accommodation, meals, and appropriate attire for the various networking events. When she added everything up, the total came to about $2,500, which was more than she had available in her business account at the time. Jessica had already approached our parents about helping with the conference expenses, but Dad was dealing with some cash flow issues in his construction business due to delayed payments from a major client. Mom had offered to help with a few $100s, but she couldn't cover the full amount either. Jessica assured me that this wasn't a permanent financial crisis, just a timing issue where the conference opportunity had come up before her next round of brand payments were scheduled to arrive. I remember feeling conflicted about the request because $2,500 was a significant amount of money for me at that time. I was still early in my career at Pacific Financial Services, and I had been working hard to build up my emergency fund and save for long-term goals like homeownership. I had never loaned that much money to anyone before, even family members, and I was nervous about the impact on my own financial stability. But Jessica seemed so confident about the return on investment, and she had never asked me for anything significant before. She explained that the conference could lead to partnerships worth thousands of dollars per month, and that attending events like this was a normal part of building a successful influencer business. She showed me registration materials and attendee lists that made the opportunity seem legitimate and valuable. Most importantly, Jessica emphasized that this was a loan, not a gift. She promised to repay the full amount within 3 months, once the new partnerships she established at the conference started generating income. She even suggested that we could formalize the arrangement with a written agreement if that would make me more comfortable, though she said she hoped our family relationship meant we could operate on trust rather than legal documents. I agreed to help her with the conference expenses, transferring the money to her account that evening after our coffee meeting. Jessica was incredibly grateful and emotional, telling me that I was the best sister anyone could ask for and that she would never forget my support during this crucial time in her business development. She promised to keep me updated on her conference experience and the partnerships that resulted from her attendance. The conference seemed to go well from what I could see on Jessica's social media accounts. She posted photos from various sessions, networking events, and meetings with brand representatives. She looked professional and confident in her outfits, and she seemed to be making the kinds of connections she had hoped for. She sent me daily text updates about interesting people she was meeting and potential collaboration opportunities that were developing. When Jessica returned from Los Angeles, she was full of excitement about the contacts she had made and the projects that were in development. She had business cards from dozens of brand representatives, and she had scheduled follow-up meetings with several companies that seemed interested in working with her. She assured me that the conference had been exactly the kind of investment her business needed, and that the partnerships she was developing would more than justify the expense. However, when the 3-month repayment deadline arrived, Jessica wasn't able to fulfill her promise. She explained that while the conference had been successful in terms of networking and relationship building, the actual contracts and payment schedules for brand partnerships moved more slowly than she had anticipated. The companies she had met with were still in the decision-making process, and the payment timelines for influencer collaborations typically extended 4 to 6 months from initial contact to final payment. Jessica seemed genuinely apologetic about the delay, and she provided detailed explanations about the brand partnership development process that sounded reasonable to someone who wasn't familiar with the influencer industry. She assured me that the money was coming, just not as quickly as she had originally projected. She offered to pay back a portion of the loan immediately and cover the rest when the first partnership payments arrived. Instead of accepting a partial payment, I told Jessica not to worry about the timing and to focus on building her business successfully. I convinced myself that family relationships shouldn't be governed by strict financial timelines, and that supporting Jessica's entrepreneurial efforts was more important than getting my money back according to a predetermined schedule. I assumed that when her business became profitable, she would obviously take care of the people who had supported her during the difficult early stages. This first loan established a pattern that would continue for the next several years, though I didn't recognize it at the time. Jessica would identify opportunities that required financial investment explain why these opportunities were crucial for her business development, and request loans that would be repaid when the investments paid off. Each request seemed reasonable on its own, and Jessica always had compelling explanations for why this particular expense would be the key to achieving sustainable profitability. What I failed to understand was that Jessica's business model was fundamentally flawed. She was spending money on lifestyle and image maintenance at a rate that far exceeded her actual income generation. The conferences, photo shoots, wardrobe updates, and networking events were real expenses, but they weren't producing the kind of return on investment that would justify their cost. Jessica was essentially using loans from family members to fund a lifestyle that her business couldn't actually support. The second major request came about 6 months later, when Jessica needed funds to hire a professional photographer for a major content creation project. She explained that brands were increasingly requiring high-quality visual content from influencers, and that her iPhone photos were no longer meeting industry standards. She had found a photographer who specialized in lifestyle and fashion content, and she wanted to invest in a comprehensive photo shoot that would provide her with months of professional content. The photography package cost $1,800 and included a full day of shooting in multiple locations, professional editing of all images, and usage rights that would allow Jessica to use the photos for both social media content and brand collaboration proposals. She showed me examples of the photographer's work with other influencers, and the quality difference between professional and amateur content was obvious even to someone outside the industry. This request felt more legitimate to me than the conference expenses, because the photography would create tangible assets that Jessica could use for months. I could see how professional photos would make her content more attractive to potential brand partners, and the investment seemed like a reasonable business expense rather than a lifestyle maintenance cost. I agreed to cover the photography costs, again with the understanding that this was a loan that would be repaid when Jessica's business reached profitability. The pattern continued to evolve over the following years, with requests becoming more frequent and larger in amount. Jessica needed funds for a website redesign that would make her brand look more professional. She needed money for a content creation course taught by a successful influencer who promised to share industry secrets. She needed help covering the costs of attending networking events where she could meet potential collaboration partners. Each request came with detailed explanations about why this particular investment would be the turning point for her business. Jessica became increasingly sophisticated in her presentations, showing me research about industry trends, competitor analysis, and projected return on investment calculations. She seemed to genuinely believe that she was building something valuable, and her enthusiasm was infectious even when my bank account was feeling the strain of repeated loans. What I didn't realize was that our parents were also increasing their financial support for Jessica during this same period. Dad had started covering her rent when she moved to the downtown loft, explaining that housing costs were a legitimate business expense since her apartment served as both her residence and her content creation studio. Mom was handling Jessica's car payments and insurance, reasoning that reliable transportation was essential for attending networking events and brand meetings. Between my contributions and our parents' support, Jessica was receiving more money each month than many people earn in full-time jobs. But somehow it never seemed to be enough to achieve the financial stability and business success that we were all hoping for. There was always another opportunity that required investment, another expense that would be crucial for reaching the next level of success. The requests became so regular that I started budgeting for them as a monthly expense rather than treating them as occasional loans. Jessica would typically reach out every few weeks with a new opportunity or urgent need, and I had gotten into the habit of transferring money without asking too many detailed questions. I trusted that she was keeping track of the total amount she owed me, and I assumed that we would settle accounts once her business achieved sustained profitability. Part 4. Living in the Shadow. By the time Jessica met David Thompson, I had been funding her lifestyle for almost 2 years without seeing any meaningful return on my investment. The monthly transfers had become so routine that I barely thought about them anymore. Jessica would text me about needing help with a photography session, a networking event, or some piece of equipment that would improve her content quality, and I would send the money the same day without questioning whether these expenses were actually generating business results. My own life during this period was stable but unremarkable. I was steadily advancing in my career at Pacific Financial Services, taking on more complex client portfolios, and earning recognition from senior management for my analytical skills and attention to detail. My apartment in Maple Ridge was comfortable and affordable, and I was managing to save money for long-term goals despite the regular financial support I was providing to Jessica. I had started dating someone I met through work, a software engineer named Marcus who worked for one of our client companies. Marcus was intelligent, reliable, and shared my appreciation for financial planning and long-term thinking. We had been together for about 8 months when Jessica started dating David, and I was beginning to think our relationship might develop into something serious. However, the contrast between my modest lifestyle and Jessica's increasingly extravagant social media presence was becoming difficult to ignore. While I was proud of my career progress and financial responsibility, I sometimes felt inadequate when I compared my life to the glamorous image Jessica projected online. She was attending exclusive events, wearing designer clothes, and traveling to beautiful locations that seemed far beyond what her actual business income could support. When Jessica started dating David, the financial requests increased dramatically in both frequency and amount. She explained that she needed to maintain certain standards of appearance and lifestyle to fit into his social circle, and that these expenses were actually investments in securing a relationship that could provide long-term financial stability for our entire family. She painted a picture of David as her ticket to the kind of life she had always dreamed of, and suggested that my support during this crucial period would pay dividends for years to come. The wardrobe updates alone cost thousands of dollars. Jessica hired a personal stylist who helped her build a collection of clothes that would be appropriate for the upscale restaurants, charity events, and social gatherings that dominated David's calendar. She needed cocktail dresses for evening events, business casual outfits for networking functions, and formal wear for galas and fundraisers. Each outfit required matching accessories, shoes, and sometimes even jewelry that would complement her overall look. Jessica also invested heavily in beauty and wellness treatments that would help her maintain the polished appearance expected in David's social circle. She started getting regular facials, professional manicures, and hair treatments at high-end salons. She hired a personal trainer and nutritionist to ensure she stayed in excellent physical condition, explaining that these investments in her appearance were essential for maintaining David's interest and impressing his family. The apartment upgrade was another major expense that required significant family support. Jessica's previous apartment had been adequate for a struggling influencer, but it wasn't appropriate for entertaining someone from David's background. She found a luxury downtown loft with modern appliances, designer furnishings, and a city view that would photograph well for her social media content. The monthly rent was nearly 3 times what she had been paying before, but she convinced our parents that this upgrade was necessary for both her business image and her relationship with David. What troubled me most during this period was how secretive Jessica had become about the true source of her funding. When David visited her new apartment, she would give him elaborate explanations about how her successful brand partnerships had enabled her to afford such a beautiful space. She created fake invoices and collaboration agreements that she could show him if he ever questioned her income level. And she became incredibly skilled at deflecting specific questions about her business finances. I started to realize that Jessica was living in a complete fantasy world, where she had convinced herself that her lifestyle was actually sustainable and earned. She talked constantly about upcoming brand deals that would justify her current spending level, and she seemed to genuinely believe that these mythical partnerships were just around the corner. When I occasionally asked for updates on her business progress or repayment timelines, she would provide detailed explanations about contract negotiations and payment schedules that sounded convincing but never seemed to materialize into actual income. The most concerning aspect of Jessica's transformation was how completely she had embraced the persona she was performing for David's benefit. She started speaking differently, using vocabulary and references that she had learned from studying his social circle. She developed strong opinions about wine, art, and travel destinations that she had researched online rather than experienced personally. She became someone I barely recognized, constantly performing a version of herself that was designed to meet other people's expectations, rather than expressing her authentic personality. Our family dinners became increasingly uncomfortable during this period, because Jessica would spend the entire evening talking about David's family, their social connections, and the various events they were attending together. She would describe elaborate dinners at exclusive restaurants, charity galas with prominent political figures, and weekend trips to beautiful locations that cost more than most people's monthly salaries. Mom would listen with fascination and pride, clearly thrilled that Jessica was experiencing this level of luxury and social status. Dad's reaction was more complex and concerning. While he was proud that Jessica had attracted someone from such a successful family, I could see him calculating the costs of keeping up with Thompson family expectations. He started talking about expanding his construction business, taking on larger commercial projects, and building the kind of wealth that would make our family worthy partners for the Thompsons. The pressure he felt to match their financial status was clearly stressing him, though he tried to hide it behind enthusiasm for Jessica's relationship. Meanwhile, my own relationship with Marcus was progressing slowly but steadily. He was kind, intelligent, and genuinely interested in building a life together based on shared values and realistic financial planning. However, I found myself feeling embarrassed about my modest lifestyle when I compared it to Jessica's glamorous social media presence. Marcus earned a good salary as a software engineer, but neither of us had the kind of family wealth that would enable us to live like Jessica and David. When Marcus suggested that we start looking at houses together, I realized that my financial support for Jessica had significantly delayed my own homeownership goals. The thousands of dollars I had transferred to her over the years could have been a substantial down payment on a modest home, and the monthly amounts I was still sending her could have been going toward mortgage payments instead of funding her unsustainable lifestyle. For the first time, I started to feel resentful about the financial arrangement that had developed between Jessica and me. I was working hard, living modestly, and delaying my own major life goals in order to support a lifestyle that seemed increasingly disconnected from reality. Jessica never acknowledged the sacrifices I was making to help her, and she seemed to take my support for granted, rather than treating it as the significant gift it actually was. The breaking point in my relationship with Marcus came when he asked me directly about my financial goals and timeline for major purchases, like a house or new car. I realized that I couldn't give him honest answers without explaining that a significant portion of my income was going to support my sister's lifestyle, and I was too embarrassed to admit the extent of my financial involvement in Jessica's affairs. Marcus was understandably confused by my vague responses about my finances, and our relationship began to deteriorate as he sensed that I wasn't being completely honest with him. When Marcus and I eventually broke up, he told me that he felt like there were aspects of my life that I was deliberately hiding from him, and that he couldn't build a serious relationship with someone who wasn't willing to be transparent about important issues like finances and family obligations. He was absolutely right, but I was too deep into the pattern of enabling Jessica to recognize how it was affecting other areas of my life. Jessica's engagement to David was announced with great fanfare on social media, featuring professional photos of the proposal and the stunning ring that David had chosen. The response from her followers was overwhelmingly positive, with thousands of likes and congratulatory comments that reinforced the image of success and happiness that she had been carefully constructing. Our parents were thrilled about the engagement, and they immediately began planning how our family would participate in the Thompson family's social circle. However, even the engagement created new financial pressures and expectations. Jessica wanted to celebrate with an elaborate engagement party that would impress David's family and friends, and she began planning an event that would cost nearly $15,000. She approached our parents about covering the major expenses like venue and catering, and she asked me to help with the remaining costs, including her dress, professional hair and makeup, and various other details that would make the party memorable. When I agreed to help with the engagement party expenses, I finally asked Jessica for a detailed accounting of what she already owed me from the previous years of support. This was the first time I had ever requested formal documentation of our financial arrangements, and Jessica seemed genuinely surprised by the request. She promised to compile a comprehensive list, but explained that she was too busy with party planning to focus on it immediately. Part 5. Building to the breaking point. The months leading up to Jessica's engagement party were a masterclass in event planning, stress, and family coordination. Jessica approached the party preparation with the same intensity she had brought to transforming her lifestyle for David's social circle, treating every detail as crucial to making the right impression on the Thompson family. She hired a wedding planner who specialized in high-end events, explaining that this party would set the tone for the entire wedding planning process and needed to meet the standards that David's family would expect. I found myself becoming increasingly involved in the party preparations, not because I particularly wanted to be, but because Jessica seemed to need constant support and validation for every decision she made. She would call me multiple times per week to discuss flower arrangements, catering options, invitation wording, and dozens of other details that seemed to overwhelm her despite having hired professional help. I started taking time off work to accompany her to vendor meetings, spending my lunch breaks researching party favors, and dedicating my weekends to addressing invitations and coordinating logistics. The guest list for the engagement party included about 80 people, carefully balanced between our family and friends and David's extensive social network. Jessica was particularly anxious about impressing David's family members, who would be seeing our family's event planning capabilities for the first time. She wanted everything to be perfect, from the specific shade of white roses in the centerpieces to the quality of the champagne being served during the toasts. Dad agreed to cover the venue costs at Grandview Country Club, which totaled nearly $8,000 for the afternoon event. This was a significant expense for our family, representing a substantial portion of his monthly income from the construction business. However, Dad seemed to view this expense as an investment in Jessica's future and our family's relationship with the Thompsons, and he was determined to make sure the party met their expectations, regardless of the financial strain. Mom threw herself into the party planning with enthusiasm that bordered on obsession. She spent weeks coordinating with florists, researching proper etiquette for engagement parties, and ensuring that every aspect of the event would reflect well on our family. She bought new clothes for herself and Dad, explaining that they needed to look appropriate for mixing with the Thompson family's social circle. She even hired a professional photographer to document the event, wanting to ensure that we had beautiful photos to commemorate Jessica's milestone. My contribution to the engagement party expenses came to about $7,000, covering Jessica's dress, professional hair and makeup, party favors for all the guests, and miscellaneous costs that seemed to multiply daily as the event approached. This was the largest single amount I had ever contributed to Jessica's lifestyle, and it represented a significant portion of my savings that I had been accumulating for my own future goals. When I agreed to help with these expenses, I finally asked Jessica to provide me with a detailed accounting of what she already owed me from the previous years of financial support. I had been keeping rough mental notes of the various transfers and loans, but I had never requested formal documentation or insisted on a comprehensive repayment plan. Jessica seemed surprised by this request, almost as if she had never considered that I might want to understand the full scope of our financial arrangement. Jessica promised to compile a detailed list of all the money I had contributed over the years, but she explained that she was too busy with party planning to focus on it immediately. She assured me that she had been keeping track of everything, and that we would sit down after the engagement party to develop a formal repayment plan. She seemed confident that her upcoming marriage to David would provide the financial stability needed to settle all her outstanding debts with family members. Looking back, I realized that Jessica's reluctance to provide detailed financial records should have been a major red flag. Any responsible person borrowing money from family members would keep careful track of loan amounts, interest calculations, and repayment schedules. Any legitimate business owner would have detailed records of investments and returns. The fact that Jessica seemed to view my financial support as something that didn't require formal documentation should have told me everything I needed to know about how she perceived our arrangement. The week before the engagement party was a whirlwind of final preparations and last-minute crises. Jessica was constantly stressed and emotional, calling me at work to discuss problems with vendors, changes to the guest list, or concerns about weather forecasts. I found myself spending more time managing Jessica's party-related anxiety than focusing on my own job responsibilities, which was starting to affect my performance at Pacific Financial Services. My boss, Michael Chen, noticed that I was distracted and less focused than usual during our team meetings. When he pulled me aside to ask if everything was okay, I gave him a vague explanation about family obligations and assured him that my performance would return to normal after the weekend. I was embarrassed to admit that I was spending so much time and energy on my sister's social events, especially when I was supposed to be building my own career and professional reputation. The financial stress of supporting Jessica's lifestyle was also starting to affect my own spending habits and long-term planning. I had been forced to delay several personal goals, including buying a new car to replace my aging Honda Civic and starting a serious house hunting process. My savings account, which had been steadily growing for years, was now fluctuating based on Jessica's monthly needs and requests. I was essentially living paycheck to paycheck, despite having a good salary, because so much of my income was being redirected to support my sister's unsustainable lifestyle. 3 days before the engagement party, Jessica had what she described as a complete breakdown about whether the event would meet David's family's expectations. She called me crying, explaining that she was terrified that something would go wrong and embarrass our family in front of the Thompsons. She had convinced herself that this party was a test of our family's worthiness to join their social circle, and that any imperfection would damage her relationship with David permanently. I spent over 2 hours on the phone with Jessica that evening, reassuring her that everything would be beautiful and that David's family would be impressed by the thought and care that had gone into planning the event. I reminded her that David loved her for who she was, not for her ability to throw perfect parties, and that his family would be focused on celebrating their engagement rather than judging our event planning skills. By the end of the conversation, Jessica seemed calmer and more confident about the upcoming party. However, I was beginning to feel exhausted by the constant emotional support and financial assistance that Jessica required. I loved my sister and wanted her to be happy, but I was starting to realize that my help might actually be enabling her anxiety and dependence, rather than helping her build genuine confidence and independence. The pattern of crisis, support, and temporary relief was becoming repetitive and unsustainable. The day before the engagement party, I took a personal day from work to help with final setup and preparation tasks. We spent the morning at Grandview Country Club, working with the catering staff, arranging flowers, and ensuring that every detail was perfect. Jessica was in full perfectionist mode, adjusting centerpieces by millimeters, and obsessing over the placement of party favors at each table setting. David arrived in the afternoon to see the final setup and help with any last-minute tasks. He seemed genuinely impressed by the elegance and attention to detail that had gone into creating the party atmosphere. He thanked our parents repeatedly for their generosity and told Jessica how beautiful everything looked. His appreciation and obvious happiness helped calm Jessica's remaining anxieties about whether the event would meet his family's expectations. That evening, I went home feeling cautiously optimistic about the next day's party. Everything was prepared, Jessica seemed confident and happy, and I was looking forward to celebrating this important milestone in my sister's life. I had bought a new dress specifically for the occasion, a pale blue color that Jessica had specifically requested for family members who weren't in the wedding party. I planned to spend the morning getting my hair done and preparing for what I expected to be a wonderful afternoon celebrating Jessica and David's future together. I fell asleep that night with no idea that the next day would completely shatter my understanding of my place in my sister's life and my family's priorities. I had no way of knowing that all the financial support, emotional assistance, and time I had invested in Jessica's success would be publicly dismissed in front of 80 guests at the most important party of her life so far. The breaking point that had been building for years was just hours away, and it would change everything about how I saw my family and myself. The morning of Jessica's engagement party dawned with perfect California weather, clear skies and gentle sunshine that made Grandview Country Club look like something from a fairy tale. I woke up early, feeling a mixture of excitement and nervous energy about the day ahead. After months of planning and preparation, everything was finally coming together for what should have been one of the happiest days in Jessica's life so far. I had scheduled a hair appointment at 9 in the morning, wanting to look my best for the formal photos and celebration. The salon was busy with other women preparing for weekend events, and there was a festive atmosphere as stylists worked their magic on clients heading to weddings, parties, and special occasions. My stylist, Maria, had been doing my hair for several years and knew exactly how to create an elegant updo that would photograph well and last throughout the afternoon. While Maria worked on my hair, I reflected on how proud I felt of Jessica and everything she had accomplished. Despite my growing concerns about the financial arrangements between us, I genuinely wanted this day to be perfect for her. She had worked hard to build her relationship with David, and she deserved to celebrate this milestone surrounded by people who loved and supported her. I was honored to be part of such an important moment in her life. After leaving the salon, I went home to finish getting ready for the party. I had chosen a pale blue dress that Jessica specifically requested for family members, a color that would complement the white and gold decorating scheme she had selected for the event. The dress was elegant but not attention-grabbing, appropriate for someone who wanted to look nice while ensuring that the bride-to-be remained the center of attention throughout the celebration. I arrived at Grandview Country Club about an hour before the official start time, wanting to help with any last-minute setup needs and ensure that everything was running smoothly. The venue looked absolutely stunning, with white roses and hydrangeas arranged in crystal vases on every table, gold accents that caught the afternoon sunlight, and elegant linens that created a sophisticated atmosphere perfect for celebrating Jessica and David's engagement. Jessica was in the bridal suite getting her makeup done by a professional artist she had hired specifically for the event. When I knocked on the door to check on her, she looked radiant in her champagne-colored dress, her hair styled in loose waves that framed her face perfectly. The makeup artist was putting finishing touches on her look, and Jessica was glowing with happiness and excitement about the celebration ahead. David arrived with his parents about 30 minutes before the guests were scheduled to start arriving. Margaret and Stephen Thompson looked exactly as elegant and sophisticated as I had expected, dressed in clothes that probably cost more than my monthly salary but worn with the casual confidence that comes from a lifetime of luxury. They greeted our parents warmly and complimented the beautiful setup, clearly impressed by the attention to detail that had gone into creating the perfect party atmosphere. The first guests began arriving right on schedule, a mixture of our family members, Jessica's friends from college and her influencer network, and David's extensive social circle that included colleagues from his investment firm, family friends, and several prominent figures from the local business community. Everyone seemed to be in a festive mood, excited to celebrate the engagement and enjoy the beautiful afternoon at one of Oakville's most prestigious venues. I spent the first hour of the party mingling with relatives I hadn't seen in months, catching up on family news and enjoying conversations with people I genuinely cared about. Several of Jessica's college friends complimented me on how beautiful the party looked, assuming correctly that I had been involved in the planning process. I felt proud of the work our family had put into creating such a memorable celebration for Jessica and David. The catering staff was doing an excellent job keeping everyone's glasses filled and ensuring that the appetizers were perfectly presented and constantly replenished. The string quartet that Jessica had hired was playing softly in the background, creating an elegant atmosphere without overwhelming conversation. Everything was proceeding exactly as we had planned, and I was beginning to relax and enjoy the celebration. David's parents seemed genuinely happy to be there, and I noticed Margaret Thompson having animated conversations with several guests about the beautiful venue and elegant decorations. Stephen was discussing business with my father, and I could see Dad beaming with pride as he talked about his construction company and the projects he was currently managing. The integration of our two families was proceeding smoothly, and I felt optimistic about the relationships that were developing. Around 2 o'clock, the photographer began organizing people for the formal photo session that would document this important milestone in Jessica and David's relationship. These weren't just casual snapshots, but carefully posed portraits that would be framed, displayed in homes, and treasured for years to come. The photographer was a professional who specialized in high-end social events, and he approached the session with the same attention to detail that Jessica had brought to every aspect of the party planning. I had been looking forward to the photo session because I knew these images would become part of our family's permanent record of Jessica's engagement celebration. As someone who had been intimately involved in planning the event and supporting Jessica throughout her relationship with David, I felt honored to be included in the formal documentation of this special day. I had positioned myself near the designated photo area, waiting for the photographer to begin organizing family members into the various groupings he had planned. The photographer started with photos of Jessica and David alone, capturing their happiness and the beautiful ring that symbolized their commitment to each other. They looked absolutely perfect together, radiant with joy and clearly excited about their future. The photographer took dozens of shots from different angles, ensuring that they would have beautiful images to commemorate this milestone moment in their relationship. Next came photos with David's immediate family, then Jessica's immediate family, followed by larger groups that included extended family members and close friends. The photographer was efficient and professional, moving people into position quickly while ensuring that everyone looked their best and that the lighting and composition were perfect for each shot. I watched and waited for my turn to join the family groups, checking my appearance and my phone camera to make sure I was ready when called. That's when Jessica made the announcement that would haunt me for months afterward. As the photographer began organizing what I assumed would be the extended family photos, Jessica stepped forward with a bright smile and addressed him directly about the guest list for the remaining shots. "Actually, let's keep this next group smaller," she said in a voice that carried clearly across the immediate area. "These formal photos should just include immediate family and the people who really matter for our official engagement documentation. Sarah doesn't need to be in these particular shots. She can join some of the casual group photos later if she wants to." The words hit me like a physical blow, delivered with such casual dismissiveness that it took several seconds for their full meaning to register. Jessica wasn't angry or emotional when she excluded me from the formal photos. She was simply stating what she apparently believed to be an obvious fact about my importance in her life and our family structure. In her mind, I didn't qualify as immediate family or as someone who really mattered enough to be included in the permanent visual record of her engagement celebration. I stood there in my pale blue dress, the specific color that Jessica had requested I wear for the family photos, holding a champagne glass with hands that began to shake as the reality of the situation sank in. Around me, other guests continued chatting and laughing, completely unaware that I had just been publicly declared irrelevant in my own sister's life. The photographer looked confused and uncomfortable, glancing between Jessica and me as if waiting for someone to clarify what was obviously an awkward family situation. But no clarification came. Our parents said nothing to correct Jessica's announcement or include me in the photo session. David remained silent, either not understanding the family dynamics at play or choosing not to interfere in what he perceived as a Mitchell family decision. Jessica continued directing the photographer about poses and lighting, as if nothing unusual had happened, as if excluding her own sister from formal family photos was a perfectly normal and reasonable thing to do. The exclusion was made even more painful by the presence of people who were included in the formal photos while I was relegated to the sidelines. Jessica had invited several of her college friends to join the immediate family grouping, along with David's business partner who had become a close friend over the past year. These people, who had known Jessica for a fraction of the time I had, and who had contributed nothing to making this celebration possible, were deemed more worthy of inclusion in the permanent record than her own sister. I felt my face burning with embarrassment and hurt as I realized that other guests were witnessing my public exclusion from the family photos. Several people near me looked confused and uncomfortable, clearly recognizing that something awkward was happening but not understanding the family dynamics well enough to know whether they should say something or pretend not to notice. The photographer kept glancing in my direction as if expecting someone to call me over to join the group. For a moment, I considered simply walking over and inserting myself into the photo session, assuming that Jessica's exclusion of me had been an oversight or misunderstanding that would be corrected once someone pointed it out. But the casual confidence with which she had made the announcement told me that this was a deliberate decision, not an accident. Jessica had consciously chosen to exclude me from the formal documentation of one of the most important days of her life so far. I tried to maintain my composure while processing the emotional impact of what had just happened. This wasn't just about being left out of a few photos. This was about being publicly declared unimportant by someone I had supported financially and emotionally for years. This was about having my contributions to Jessica's lifestyle, and this very celebration dismissed as if they meant nothing. This was about realizing that my own sister saw me as expendable, someone whose presence wasn't necessary for documenting her major life milestones. The photo session continued for another 20 minutes, with the photographer capturing multiple poses and groupings that would become Jessica's official engagement portraits. I stood nearby, smile frozen on my face, pretending to enjoy casual conversations with other guests, while watching my family pose for pictures that would hang in their homes for years to come. Pictures that would tell the story of Jessica's engagement celebration without any evidence that I had been there or played any role in making it possible. When the formal photo session finally ended, Jessica approached me with the same bright smile she had been wearing throughout the celebration. She seemed completely oblivious to the hurt and embarrassment she had just caused, acting as if nothing unusual had happened during the photo process. "Wasn't that fun?" she said cheerfully, adjusting her dress and checking her makeup and her phone camera. "I think we got some really beautiful shots." The photographer said the lighting was perfect, and everyone looked so elegant and happy. "These are going to be amazing memories of today." I managed to nod and make appropriate responses, but I felt like I was watching the interaction from outside my own body. Jessica seemed genuinely excited about the photos, and completely unaware that she had just devastated me in front of 80 guests. Her casual dismissal of my feelings and my place in the family was almost more hurtful than the original exclusion from the photos. The rest of the party continued around us as if nothing had happened. Guests mingled and enjoyed the beautiful afternoon. The catering staff served elegant appetizers and kept champagne glasses filled, and the string quartet continued playing softly in the background. But for me, the celebration had been permanently tainted by the realization that my own sister viewed me as unworthy of inclusion in the most important moments of her life. Part 7. Immediate damage control attempts. The remainder of Jessica's engagement party passed in a blur of forced smiles and mechanical conversations as I struggled to process what had just happened while maintaining the appearance of enjoying the celebration. Every time someone complimented the beautiful event or asked about my role in the planning process, I felt a fresh wave of hurt and embarrassment about being excluded from the formal photos that would document this day for posterity. I found myself gravitating toward the bar area, not because I wanted to drink heavily, but because it provided a location where I could stand with my back partially to the crowd and take a few moments to collect myself, without being obvious about my emotional state. The bartender, a professional who had worked many high-end events, seemed to sense that I was having a difficult time and offered me a glass of ice water along with my champagne. David's business partner, James, approached me during one of these moments when I was trying to regain my composure. He was a genuinely nice man who had been included in the formal family photos despite knowing Jessica for less than a year, and he seemed uncomfortable about something he wanted to discuss. "Sarah, I hope you don't mind me saying this," he began carefully, "but I was surprised that you weren't included in those family photos earlier. I mean, you're Jessica's sister, and from what David has told me, you've been incredibly supportive of their relationship. It seemed like an oversight that should have been corrected." His observation confirmed that other people had noticed the exclusion and recognized how inappropriate it was. While I appreciated his concern, having an outsider point out the obvious unfairness of the situation made me feel even more humiliated about what had happened. I managed to give him a gracious response about family photo traditions being complicated, but inside I was mortified that my public dismissal had been so obvious that virtual strangers felt compelled to comment on it. As the afternoon progressed, I noticed that several other guests were giving me sympathetic looks or making comments that suggested they had witnessed the photo situation and felt uncomfortable about it. My cousin Jennifer, who had driven down from Sacramento for the party, pulled me aside to ask if everything was okay between Jessica and me. When I assured her that everything was fine, she looked skeptical but didn't push the issue further. Around 4 o'clock, about 2 hours after the photo incident, I decided that I needed to address the situation directly with Jessica, rather than spending the rest of the party feeling hurt and confused. I waited for a moment when she was briefly alone, having just finished a conversation with some of David's college friends who had attended the celebration. "Jessica, can I talk to you privately for a minute?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual and upbeat despite the emotional turmoil I was experiencing. "Of course," she replied with the same bright enthusiasm she had maintained throughout the party. "Isn't this just the most perfect day? Everyone keeps telling me how beautiful everything looks, and David's parents seem really happy with how everything turned out. I think we really impressed them with the quality of the celebration." We walked toward a quieter area near the edge of the terrace, away from the main group of guests but still within the general party area. I took a deep breath and tried to find the right words to express my feelings without creating a scene that would disrupt her special day. "I was wondering about the photo situation earlier," I began carefully. "I was surprised when you said I didn't need to be included in the formal family photos. I had assumed that as your sister, I would be part of the official engagement documentation." Jessica's expression flickered with what might have been irritation or confusion before settling back into her party smile. "Oh, that, she said dismissively. I just wanted to keep those particular photos focused on the most important people. You know how formal family photos can get really crowded and lose their impact when too many people are included. Her explanation made my exclusion sound like a practical decision about photo composition, rather than a judgment about my importance in her life. But the casual way she dismissed my concerns told me that she didn't understand how hurtful her actions had been, or perhaps didn't care about the impact on my feelings. But Jessica, I'm your sister, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, and I've been really involved in helping plan this celebration. I thought that would make me part of the core group for the formal photos. Jessica sighed in the way that people do when they feel like someone is making an issue out of something they consider trivial. Sarah, you're being way too sensitive about this. They're just photos. We can take plenty of casual pictures together later if you really want some documentation of the day. The formal shots are different. They're more about documenting the official announcement of our engagement. Her response revealed that she genuinely didn't understand why being excluded from the formal photos was hurtful and significant. In her mind, the distinction between formal and casual photos was meaningful, and she saw nothing wrong with relegating me to the casual category, while including her college friends and David's business associates in the formal documentation. It's not just about having photos together, I tried to explain. It's about what the exclusion says about my place in your life and our family. When you publicly announce that I don't need to be included in the immediate family photos, it sends a message about how you view our relationship. Jessica looked around at the ongoing party, clearly wanting to end this conversation and return to her hosting duties. You're really overthinking this, Sarah. Everyone knows you're my sister. You don't need to be in every single photo to prove that. Can we please just enjoy the party and not turn this into some kind of drama? Her use of the word drama to describe my legitimate hurt feelings was particularly painful. Jessica was characterizing my reasonable response to public humiliation as an overreaction, which made me feel like I was being unreasonable for expecting basic consideration and respect from my own sister. I'm not trying to create drama, I said, feeling my composure starting to slip despite my efforts to stay calm. I'm just trying to understand why you would exclude me from something so important when I've been so supportive of your relationship and this celebration. Jessica's smile became more strained, and I could see that she was getting impatient with the conversation. Look, Sarah, I appreciate everything you've done to help with today, I really do, but this is my engagement party, and I get to decide how I want to document it. The formal photos are about me and David and our immediate families. Everything doesn't have to include everyone all the time. Her response made it clear that she viewed my exclusion as a reasonable exercise of her prerogatives as the guest of honor, rather than as a hurtful rejection of someone who had been central to making the celebration possible. She seemed genuinely puzzled by my emotional response and apparently saw no connection between my financial and logistical support for the party and my expectation of being treated as an important family member. Before I could respond further, Margaret Thompson approached us with a warm smile, clearly wanting to compliment Jessica on the beautiful party and perhaps meet more of her family members. Jessica's demeanor immediately brightened as she turned her attention to David's mother, effectively ending our conversation about the photo situation. Mrs. Thompson, I'm so glad you're enjoying the party, Jessica said with renewed enthusiasm. Sarah was just telling me how impressed she is with how everything turned out. Sarah, you remember Mrs. Thompson from dinner last month, right? I managed to exchange pleasantries with Margaret Thompson and participate in a brief conversation about the beautiful venue and elegant decorations. She was gracious and warm, complimenting the obvious care and attention that had gone into planning such a lovely celebration. But I felt like I was performing my role as the supportive sister, while internally processing the dismissive way Jessica had handled my concerns about the photo exclusion. After Margaret Thompson moved on to mingle with other guests, Jessica immediately began walking back toward the main party area without addressing any of the issues I had raised about the photo situation. It was clear that she considered the matter closed and didn't intend to discuss it further or make any changes to how the rest of the photo documentation would be handled. I followed her back into the main party area, but I felt like something fundamental had shifted in my understanding of our relationship. Jessica's casual dismissal of my hurt feelings and her characterization of my concerns as drama revealed that she didn't see me as someone whose opinions and emotions deserved serious consideration. I was useful for providing logistical and financial support, but my actual feelings about how I was treated were apparently irrelevant to her. The rest of the afternoon continued with the same level of celebration and enjoyment from the other guests, but I found it increasingly difficult to participate authentically in the festivities. I went through the motions of mingling, complimenting the bride-to-be, and expressing enthusiasm about the upcoming wedding. But part of me had disconnected from the celebration after realizing how little my presence and contributions actually meant to Jessica. Around 5:30, as the party was beginning to wind down, the photographer approached Jessica about taking some additional casual photos with various family members and friends. This was apparently the opportunity Jessica had referenced earlier when she suggested that I could be included in some informal documentation of the day. "Sarah, come get in some photos with Jessica," the photographer called out, clearly trying to be inclusive and perhaps having noticed the earlier awkwardness around the formal photo session. I joined Jessica for several casual photos, but the experience felt hollow and performative after being excluded from the formal documentation that would actually be framed and displayed. These casual shots felt like consolation prizes, token gestures that acknowledged my presence without treating me as truly important to the celebration. Jessica seemed perfectly comfortable with this arrangement, posing enthusiastically for the casual photos, while apparently feeling no need to address or correct the earlier exclusion from the formal family portraits. Her ability to compartmentalize the situation and move on without acknowledging the hurt she had caused was perhaps the most revealing aspect of the entire interaction. As guests began to leave around 6 o'clock, many people thanked me for helping create such a beautiful celebration. Several mentioned how obvious it was that a lot of love and care had gone into planning every detail of the party. These comments made me feel appreciated by the broader group of attendees, but they also highlighted the contrast between how others valued my contributions and how Jessica had dismissed my importance during the formal photo session. When David's parents were preparing to leave, they made a point of thanking our entire family for hosting such an elegant and memorable celebration. Margaret Thompson specifically complimented the attention to detail and the obvious effort that had gone into making the day special for Jessica and David. Their appreciation felt genuine and warm, and I was glad that the party had succeeded in making a positive impression on the Thompson family. However, as I watched the last guests departing and helped with the initial cleanup process, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed in my relationship with Jessica and my understanding of my place in our family structure. The photo exclusion had been a public declaration of my relative unimportance, and Jessica's dismissive response to my concerns had confirmed that she didn't see this as a problem that needed to be addressed or corrected. Part 8. Discovery and Documentation Phase. The week following Jessica's engagement party was one of the most emotionally challenging periods of my life. I returned to work at Pacific Financial Services on Monday morning, trying to maintain my professional demeanor, but I found it difficult to concentrate on client portfolios and market analysis when my mind kept replaying the events of the previous Saturday. The photo exclusion incident had shaken my understanding of my family relationships in ways that I was still struggling to process. My colleague Ashley Park noticed that I seemed distracted during our morning team meeting and asked if everything was okay. I gave her a vague explanation about family stress and assured her that I would be back to normal soon, but privately I was beginning to realize that the engagement party had revealed problems that wouldn't be easily resolved. The casual way Jessica had dismissed my concerns suggested that this wasn't an isolated incident, but rather a symptom of deeper issues in how she viewed our relationship. That evening, I decided to do something I had never done before in all the years of providing financial support to Jessica. I sat down with my bank statements and began calculating exactly how much money I had transferred to her over the past 4 years. What I discovered was far more shocking than I had expected, even though I had been the one writing the checks and making the transfers. The spreadsheet I created that night was a revelation in financial documentation. I went through every bank statement dating back to Jessica's first request for conference attendance funding, categorizing each transfer and noting the stated purpose for every payment. The pattern that emerged was both clear and disturbing. What had started as occasional loans for specific business opportunities had evolved into regular monthly support that far exceeded what most people earn in full-time employment. The major categories of support included what Jessica had termed business investments, which covered everything from photography sessions to networking events to website development. There were lifestyle maintenance expenses that she had justified as necessary for maintaining her professional image and her relationship with David. There were emergency payments when she claimed to be temporarily short on funds due to delayed brand partnership payments. And there were celebration costs, like the engagement party that she had framed as family investments in her future success. The total amount came to $43,875 over a period of 47 months. This represented almost exactly $1,000 per month in financial support, which was more than many people's rent payments, and represented a significant portion of my take-home salary from Pacific Financial Services. The number was so large that I had to double-check my calculations several times before accepting that it was accurate. What made the financial analysis even more troubling was that I could find no evidence of any repayment during this entire period. Jessica had occasionally mentioned plans to pay back specific loans when certain brand partnerships materialized, but no actual money had ever flowed back in my direction. The financial relationship had been entirely one way, with me providing continuous support while receiving nothing in return except promises and explanations about future success. I spent several evenings that week researching average incomes for social media influencers to understand whether Jessica's business claims had any basis in reality. What I discovered was that genuine financial success in the influencer industry required either massive follower counts or highly specialized niche expertise that commanded premium rates from brands. Jessica's follower count and engagement metrics, while respectable, were nowhere near the levels that would generate the kind of income her lifestyle suggested. According to industry reports and salary surveys, an influencer with Jessica's metrics might reasonably expect to earn between $800 and $1,500 per month from brand partnerships and sponsored content. This was far below the level of financial support she was receiving from our family, which meant that her entire lifestyle was essentially subsidized rather than earned through her business activities. The research also revealed that many aspiring influencers struggled with exactly the problem Jessica seemed to be facing. They invested heavily in creating the appearance of success, hoping that the lifestyle and image would eventually attract the brand partnerships needed to justify the expenses. However, this approach often led to unsustainable spending patterns, where the costs of maintaining the image exceeded any actual business income. As I compiled this financial and industry information, I began to understand that Jessica's business was fundamentally structured as a fantasy, rather than a legitimate enterprise. She was spending money to create the appearance of success while generating very little actual income, and she was using family support to bridge the gap between her expenses and her earnings. The promises of future profitability that had justified years of loans and support were likely unrealistic, given the competitive nature of the influencer market. The more I analyzed the situation, the more I realized that my financial support had actually enabled Jessica to avoid confronting the reality of her business model. By providing regular transfers that covered her expenses, I had allowed her to continue pursuing an unsustainable lifestyle without forcing her to develop genuine income streams or make realistic budgetary decisions. My attempts to be supportive had actually become part of the problem. On Thursday evening of that week, I called my best friend Emma Rodriguez to discuss what I had discovered during my financial analysis. Emma was a lawyer who specialized in family financial disputes, and she had occasionally expressed concern about the level of support I was providing to Jessica without any formal agreements or repayment schedules. $44,000, Emma repeated when I told her the total amount. Sarah, that's more than a down payment on a house. That's more than most people's annual salaries. You've basically been providing Jessica with a full-time income for the past 4 years without getting anything in return. Emma's perspective helped me understand the magnitude of what had been happening. I had been thinking of the transfers as individual favors or loans, but when viewed collectively, they represented a massive financial commitment that had significantly affected my own life goals and economic security. I had delayed major purchases, postponed homeownership plans, and limited my own lifestyle choices in order to fund Jessica's unsustainable spending. The photo situation at the engagement party makes more sense now, Emma continued. Jessica has gotten comfortable with the idea that you exist to provide support without expecting recognition or reciprocation. She's trained herself to see your contributions as entitlements rather than gifts. which is why she didn't think twice about excluding you from the formal documentation of an event you helped fund. Emma's analysis was painful but accurate. The pattern of financial support without acknowledgement had created a dynamic where Jessica felt entitled to my assistance, while feeling no obligation to treat me with the respect and consideration typically expected in family relationships. The engagement party photo exclusion was just the most visible manifestation of an attitude that had been developing over years of one-sided financial arrangements. Friday evening, I made a decision that felt both necessary and terrifying. I was going to confront Jessica about the financial arrangement between us and demand both acknowledgement of the total amount involved and a realistic repayment plan. I couldn't continue providing support to someone who clearly didn't value my contributions or treat me as an important family member. I spent the weekend drafting a detailed email that documented every transfer I had made over the past 4 years, including dates, amounts, and the stated purposes for each payment. I attached copies of bank transfer confirmations and created a summary spreadsheet that showed the total financial support, along with a conservative interest calculation. The email was professional and factual, avoiding emotional language while making clear that I expected acknowledgement of the debt and a concrete plan for repayment. The email also addressed the broader pattern of taking my support for granted, referencing the engagement party photo exclusion as an example of how my contributions seemed to be invisible to Jessica despite their substantial impact on her lifestyle and major life events. I explained that I could no longer continue providing financial support to someone who didn't seem to value or respect the sacrifices I was making to help her. Before sending the email, I made copies of all the financial documentation and stored them in a separate location. Emma had advised me to treat this situation like any other financial dispute and ensure that I had complete records of all transactions and communications. While I hoped that Jessica would respond positively to my request for acknowledgement and repayment, I wanted to be prepared for the possibility that she would deny or minimize the scope of her debt. The email was sent on Sunday evening, and I immediately felt a mixture of relief and anxiety about having finally addressed the situation directly. For years, I had been providing support while avoiding difficult conversations about expectations and reciprocity. The engagement party photo exclusion had forced me to confront the reality that my contributions were being taken for granted, and I could no longer pretend that the financial arrangement was working for both of us. Jessica's response came within 2 hours, which surprised me given that she typically took days to respond to important emails. However, the content of her response was even more shocking than the quick timing. "Sarah, I can't believe you're making such a big deal about money when we're supposed to be celebrating my engagement," she wrote. "I thought family members supported each other without keeping score or demanding payback like some kind of loan shark. The engagement party was beautiful, and everyone had a wonderful time. I don't understand why you're trying to ruin that with these financial demands." Her response completely avoided addressing the actual amounts involved or acknowledging that she owed me any money at all. Instead, she characterized my request for repayment as inappropriate behavior that was somehow damaging to the family celebration. She had reframed the situation so that I was the problem for requesting acknowledgement of her debt, rather than her being the problem for taking advantage of my generosity. The email continued, with Jessica explaining that she had always assumed our financial arrangements were gifts rather than loans, and that she was hurt and confused by my sudden change in attitude about family support. She claimed that she had never promised to repay the money, and that she didn't understand why I was treating family relationships like business transactions. This response revealed that Jessica had been operating under completely different assumptions about our financial relationship than I had been. While I had viewed the transfers as loans that would eventually be repaid when her business became profitable, she had apparently seen them as gifts that came with no strings attached and no expectation of reciprocity. The disconnect between our perceptions explained why she had felt comfortable excluding me from the engagement party photos while accepting thousands of dollars in support for the very event where I was dismissed. Part 9. Strategic Preparation. Jessica's dismissive response to my email about the financial support I had provided crystallized something important for me. This wasn't just a misunderstanding about money or family obligations. This was a fundamental disconnect about respect, reciprocity, and the basic principles that should govern relationships between people who claim to care about each other. Jessica's ability to reframe my request for acknowledgement as inappropriate behavior revealed that she had no intention of taking responsibility for the financial advantage she had gained through my support. I took Monday off work to process the situation and develop a more comprehensive strategy for addressing what had become a serious family crisis. My initial hope had been that presenting Jessica with clear documentation of her debt would lead to an honest conversation about repayment and a recognition that our financial relationship needed to become more balanced and sustainable. Instead, her response had made it clear that she didn't view the situation as problematic and had no intention of changing her behavior voluntarily. That morning, I called Emma Rodriguez to discuss the legal options available to me for recovering the money Jessica owed. Emma explained that family financial disputes were notoriously difficult to resolve through legal channels, especially when there were no written agreements or formal documentation of loan terms. However, she also pointed out that the extensive bank records I had compiled would provide strong evidence of the financial transfers, even if proving the loan nature of those transfers might be challenging. The bigger question, Emma said, is whether you want to pursue legal action against your own sister. Family lawsuits tend to destroy relationships permanently, and the emotional cost often exceeds whatever financial recovery you might achieve. Have you considered other approaches that might be more effective in getting Jessica to acknowledge the situation and change her behavior? Emma's question forced me to think more clearly about what I actually wanted to accomplish. While recovering the $44,000 would certainly improve my financial situation, the money wasn't really the primary issue anymore. What I wanted was recognition that my contributions had value, acknowledgement that Jessica's treatment of me was unfair, and changes in the family dynamic that would prevent this kind of exploitation from continuing in the future. What if you approached this as a family intervention rather than a financial dispute? Emma suggested. Jessica's behavior suggests that she's lost touch with reality about money and relationships. The whole family has been enabling this fantasy lifestyle, and maybe what's needed is a coordinated effort to help her understand the consequences of her choices. This perspective shifted my thinking about the situation significantly. Instead of focusing solely on getting my money back, I could use the financial documentation as evidence of a broader pattern of irresponsible behavior that was affecting everyone in the family. Jessica's debt to me was just the most visible example of how she had been taking advantage of family support while contributing nothing in return. I spent Tuesday researching family intervention strategies and financial counseling resources. I discovered that there were professionals who specialized in helping families address issues around money, enabling behaviors, and dysfunctional financial relationships. These counselors worked with families to identify unhealthy patterns, establish boundaries, and develop more sustainable ways of providing support without creating dependency. The more I learned about family financial dynamics, the more I realized that our entire family had been participating in Jessica's fantasy lifestyle. Dad had been covering her rent, Mom had been handling her car payments and insurance, and I had been providing monthly support for her supposed business expenses. Jessica had essentially been receiving a salary from the family without providing any real work or value in return, and none of us had been honest about the unsustainability of this arrangement. Wednesday evening, I had dinner with my parents to discuss the situation more broadly than just my specific financial issues with Jessica. I brought copies of my documentation and some research about family financial counseling, hoping to help them understand that Jessica's problems went beyond my individual concerns about loan repayment. Mom, Dad, I need to talk to you about Jessica's financial situation and how it's affecting our whole family, I began carefully. I've been providing her with significant financial support for years, and I don't think any of us have been honest about whether this support is actually helping her or just enabling her to avoid dealing with reality. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.